Hello everybody, this is Sean and welcome to my AIONFX Theseus build video. Not 100% sure that's how you say the name, AIONFX. It's AIONFX.com, and this is the Theseus kit, which is a Analogman King of Tone clone. Or at least it says it is. I want to talk about that here in just a second. So the first thing I want to say while we're looking at this part of the video is just, if you are wondering if you should build a video or if you can build a kit or whatever, you absolutely can. Main thing is just follow the directions really well, but lay out all your parts like I have here. I measure all of the resistors and all of the capacitors, and then I just lay them out on a sheet of paper and write down the values, so that way I can compare what I've measured and how many I have compared to what's on the parts list. A little bit of time up front will save you a lot of headache later if you get something wrong and have to try to take this pack apart and troubleshoot it. Believe me, especially if you are new to electronics, you do not want to have to do that. It's worth a little bit of time up front. Okay, so now while you just kind of watch me solder resistors and things like that, I want to talk about the kit a little bit. I've been building electronics since the 1980s, mostly DIY, vacuum tube amplifiers for guitar and hi-fi, a lot for hi-fi, though I guess I build a lot of guitar stuff now too. But a lot of my friends, since I'm in electronics, asked me to build kits for them, and so I built a lot of kits as well over the years. I've probably done a dozen of these King of Tone clone type pedals from various brands or whatever. This is the first time I've done one of the AIONFX. Again, this is the Theseus. Now again, because this claims to be a King of Tone, I want to talk about one of the reasons why I think it's significantly different from a King of Tone and most other King of Tone pedals. And for those of you who don't know, King of Tone is a dual drive pedal. It's got two sections, A, B, 1, 2, whichever you want to call it. And they're configurable to be either a clean boost, an overdrive, or closer to a distortion. And in some cases, depending on how you build the kit or if it has a switch, which I'll talk about that more in a little bit, it can also be a low or high gain on the circuit as well. But a real King of Tone takes a standard 9-volt input, which is standard for almost every guitar pedal ever made. There's only a few out there that run on something other than that. And it converts it to 18 volts internally. It has a 9-volt and an 18-volt power inside the pedal. That's one of the things that gives it its sound and its ability to have a super high output on that. If you're using the clean boost in the second stage to really drive an amp hard, but with a relatively clean signal from that actual boost section. This pedal does not have that, and I did not realize that when I was buying it. I still would have bought the kit anyway, but it's worth mentioning that this pedal doesn't work that way. It is the voltage that you put into it. So if you put a standard 9-volt supply into it like you would a regular King of Tone, then you're going to get a 9-volt version of the pedal. There's no 18 volts. What they've done here is allow you to run it off of 9 to 18 volts. So if you have a 12-volt, 15-volt, or 18-volt supply, or switchable supply, some of the pedal supplies out there have switchable options, then you can do that. But to get the true King of Tone type sound, you have to have an 18-volt supply for this pedal and not just a regular 9-volt one. And even at that, I think there's a little bit of difference in the sound. I did notice, comparing this to another King of Tone clone that I've built and still have, is this one's just a hair noisier. And I think that's because you're taking that charge pump that does that power supply, 9 volts to 18 volts, and the additional filtering capacitors that it uses out of the power supply. So you're getting a little bit more noise, I think, from the power supply in this pedal versus a true King of Tone or a true King of Tone clone that uses the charge pump style power supply. The bonus is, though, you have the option to run it on 9 to 18 volts. You may want the original. You may want the flexibility to alter the actual power supply voltage and thus alter the way the pedal sounds overall. So that can be a plus or a minus, but I thought it was a significant enough difference that it was definitely worth talking about here and something that probably should be mentioned on the website. So again, while you're watching me put the last of the resistors in, let's talk about the kit itself. The PC boards in this kit are very, very high quality. I'm very impressed with them. And one thing I would point out is this company sells kits, a lot of kits, but they primarily have PC boards available. So you just order the PC board that you want, get your own parts and enclosure and put it together. In that respect, these PC boards are as good as you are going to find from anybody. They're excellent. They're extremely high quality. I highly, highly recommend. On the kit as a whole, overall, it's very high quality for the most part. The one piece that I wasn't really thrilled with is the actual foot switches, and it may just be me being silly. They're very easy to operate. They just don't have the feel of like a traditional foot pedal where you hit it and it's kind of like clunk. You can feel it really. They switch very easily, which just makes me question a little bit how robust they're going to be and reliable they're going to be over a lot of, stomping on them with boots or whatever. But I could be totally wrong. They may last forever. I don't know. But they do have a slightly, I don't want to say cheap because that's not really it, but they don't have quite as quality of feel as a lot of other kits and pre-made pedals that I have, used over the years. The in and out jacks are just standard jacks. You've got a couple for the effects loop, which is cool on this pedal. This one thing I'll talk about here in a sec. They're not Switchcraft jacks or whatever, but they're perfectly fine jacks. Again, because this is a dual overdrive, you've got the first section, second section, a whole bunch of pedals built that way out there. But one cool thing this one does that most King of Tone clones do not do is give you an effects loop between the two sections. So you can have your overdrive up front, have some stuff in the middle, like your effects and delays, modulation, whatever, and then have the boost be the last thing if you're really trying to use that to punch the front of your tube amp or whatever. May or may not be handy to you, but it is a kind of nice feature. I've never had one with an effects loop to try before, so all I can say is it's there. I'm definitely going to check it out and see how it does, but that's about as far as I can go to tell you on how that works. So again, let's go back to building it. When I'm building one of these kits, I literally just go through the instructions, and this didn't come with an instruction book. I had to print, it just comes with a PDF off the website, so I had to print out the actual pages of the construction. It's like a 25-page book, give or take, I forget, but there are like 10 that are specifically the build steps. I printed those out so that I can just mark them off as I'm going through. So every resistor I put in, I mark off. And having that is also, when you measure your parts and have them laid out like I had there on the right, you can look at the quantities and the values and compare and make sure you have everything right up front. Again, you do not want to take one of these pedal kits back apart and try to fix it after the fact. It's totally doable. But especially if you're new, it is definitely something you do not want to do. You really don't. So I would just recommend putting in a little bit of extra time and getting it right to begin with. So again, I do the same thing with the capacitors. You'll see me do that here in a little bit when we get to that step. But again, it's just time well spent. At this point, let's just talk about soldering. So if you're new, you want to get some high quality solder and a high quality soldering iron. You don't have to spend a lot on a soldering iron. You preferably want one that is temperature controlled and you definitely want one that has a fine tip because this is very small components in a very tight space. So like a traditional one that you're going to get at the hardware store, something like that, that's not going to cut it for this. You need to go to an electronics supply place. Amazon probably has them if you want to pay extra, but Parts Express, Mouser, anybody that sells electronics is going to have something. You can get a really good, nice soldering iron for $25-30. It's temperature controlled. Obviously, there's much more expensive ones, but you don't necessarily have to go to that level. But your $10 ones are probably not going to cut it. You're probably going to spend more on a roll of solder than you are the soldering iron, so just tossing that out there. I prefer lead-based solder. That's what I'm using here, and I have a huge stash of it because they're not making it, definitely not making it as much anymore. Most companies are not using it. But anyway, if you are using lead-based solder, just be aware that you are using lead. Don't eat it. You heard that here first. Here you go. You can see I'm measuring all the capacitors. Even though I sorted them by shape and the labels, compared the quantities to the actual list, I went through and measured them just like I did the resistors. Again, it's just worth having everything perfect. Make sure you don't have any bad parts. It's worth that little bit of extra time. Plus, you're building this to have a fun experience. You know, I'm drinking coffee here in the morning, just having a good time. So do the same thing. One thing I'll talk about, the populating the board, that I thought was strange about this AIONFX kit. Normally, you would either go left to right or all of the same value. So if you had 4 10K resistors, you would take all 4 10K resistors and put them in first and go through them value by value, or, you know, in a sequence of something like left to right. In this case, they just have you do them one of each all over the board at what seems almost at random. And I'm kind of thinking they did that just to make it, I'm thinking the logic is maybe it's more fun. It seems like you're doing more. I'm not really sure why they do that. But they do follow the principle of doing the shortest component to the tallest. So that's why you do the resistors first and capacitors in larger pieces with the ICs and things like that. But the reason you do that is when you put them in and you flip the board over onto your desktop or your workspace, it helps hold them in while you're soldering. So they do the principle of shortest to tallest. Just a little weirdness on going how you actually put the values in. Most people probably aren't going to care, but I found that odd. It's unusual compared to most kits. Normally you would do all your 1K resistors, all your 10K resistors, all your 27K resistors, etc. Something to that effect. Again, minor, doesn't matter. One thing I'll point out there, you can see I have a little jeweler's eyepiece, monocle, whatever you want to call it. If you're only doing one kit, you might get away without having that. But if you're going to do more than one, I would recommend it even with one. Grab one on Amazon for cheap. They're not expensive. But that lets you actually see the solder joints that you do. So once you're done soldering this, you can go back over them and look and get a really good view and see if any aren't quite perfect, or what's probably more likely to happen is when you have two pads side by side, you might have the solder touching, and that is definitely something that would cause a problem. So that lets you just look over the board really quickly and get a much better view. Make sure that you don't have anything like that shorting out. Again, trust me, it's much easier to put the time in at this step than to try to go back and fix it after the fact. If you're on the fence about building a kit, this one or any other kit, I'd say go for it. They're fun. It's not as difficult as you think. If you have any electronics experience, it's really not difficult at all. It just takes a little bit of time. Again, the main thing is just follow the directions. Be very systematic about it. Mark off what you've placed on the board. You can always compare the piece of paper with what's marked out with what you have placed on the board to make sure that you don't have anything in the wrong place. It's worth that time and effort. Again, there's 3 boards on this. One's for the foot switch, the main electronics board that houses the circuit, and then the in and out board. I can't recommend enough the quality of these. They're just great. I'm definitely going to buy some more. I said that, but I am going to buy some more of these. They're great. The kits as a whole, maybe they're good. They're definitely a good value, and they're definitely a good product. They're just some of the parts I want to switch out probably for me. And so if I build another one, I might just do it starting with the board and then getting all the parts that I want to put on it. But this is a great kit. Definitely have fun building it. And you can, let's just say it this way. There are a lot of kits out there that are a lot worse than this one. This is actually one of the very high quality ones, and when I'm critiquing it here, I'm coming from many, many, many years of electronics experience, and the fact that I generally build things as, you know, nicely as possible when I'm building them myself from scratch. So I have I'm coming from a very perfectionist attitude. I'm not critiquing the kit in a way that it's bad for the money or anything like that. I think it's a great kit, and it sounds really good, and had no problems with it. Once, a spoiler alert here, once it's all together, it worked perfectly and sounded great. So again, there you can see there's the 4 in-out jacks. So again, you have in and out for the guitar and the amp, but you also have the effects send and return, which is cool and very unusual. I am looking forward to trying that out, but that's a nice bonus. And the fact this is on a board itself is really deluxe compared to a lot of companies' kits that just have you run some wire up to the jack onto the, you know, the chassis of the pedal. So that is very, very nice. And it has quick disconnects as well. So hadn't noticed that. The wiring that we wired up earlier is a quick disconnect. So if you take the pedal apart, you don't have to desolder anything. You can just pull a quick disconnect apart and then take the pedal apart. Now here's one thing in the kit instructions that I would not do. They tell you to go ahead and crank these down tightly when you're putting the potentiometers in. I would not do that, and I did not do that. I just put them, you know, finger tight, because I wanted to be able to twist the potentiometers, because you need to line all of those pins up with the holes in the circuit board. And if you tighten them down like they tell you to, you'll never get that happen. So pay attention to what I just did there. I sprayed a little bit of CRC 226 in each of the potentiometers. Deoxit is pretty popular in the guitar world. You probably heard of that, but that stuff's like $15-20 a can at the time of making this video. And CRC 226 is a huge industrial spray. They sell it at Home Depot and every electrical store in America, pretty much. And it's like $3 or $4 a can, so you can buy 5 or 6 cans of that stuff for the price of a can of Deoxit. I've used it for years. It's great. So what it does is it'll lube up your potentiometer, make it smoother to turn. But it also, if you have a dirty pot like in an old guitar, it helps get the scratchiness out there as you're turning it. But it helps prevent that, because it leaves a thin lubricating film inside the potentiometer. So I always put a little dab of that in any potentiometers that I'm putting together in a amp or a, you know, pedal, anything like this, just as a preventative to help keep that scratchiness from, you know, oxidation happening in the first place. So that's what that spray is. Highly recommend you check it out, because it's a great cheap alternative to you know, the Deoxit spray that most people recommend. Not that Deoxit's bad, it's just, it's pretty expensive for what it is. So again, here's where we're lining up all those pins with the circuit board. So again, you want to be able to move those potentiometers around a little bit. You'll notice I only do a couple just to hold the board in place, and I'm going to get everything lined up before I do all of the connections. I want to make sure I don't have any problems, because if you have to take it back apart, it's much easier to desolder 2 joints than, you know, 20 or whatever it is. So I don't know if you noticed there, in the instructions they tell you to go ahead and put the LEDs into the bezels, and then try to line up the holes with the board as you're pushing down onto the LEDs. It's really difficult. I found it much easier to put the LEDs in the board, lower the board down to where I could see, and then just slide the LEDs down by hand with my fingers until they went into the bezels. That way, I just had to push them into the bezel versus trying those super small holes, put the LED pins back up in. You may want to go back and watch that, because that is a neat trick that works way better than what's in the instructions. And you can see here I'm going back and, you know, just finishing all of the solder connections on all of the potentiometers and foot switches. And here's where we put the in-out board in. So I did not use all of the spacers, the plastic spacers that came with the jacks for the send for the in-out. They had extras for what you needed to actually fit the space. So again, just put the lock washers on the guitar in and amp out. And then I think I only used one of the plastic ones, spacers for the send and return. But whatever, you know, makes your kit line up properly to where when you tighten them down, they're all tight. Now again, here I'm going over with a socket and just hand tightening everything. Again, these are small screws, cheap metal. You don't have to crank them. You'll notice I used a ratchet there, but I barely turned this. Do not crank on these. You will strip them out and mess up your kit. You want them just to be the least little bit of tight, and then you're good. So they say don't use pliers to tighten those, I forget what they call them, but they're like a pretty washer to make the jacks look nice that goes on there. I just put some tape over the pair of pliers so it wouldn't mark those up. If you're going to do that, definitely use the tape. Otherwise, just use, you know, your finger tight. It's just for looks there. It's those rings around the pedal switches. And then you'll see here, I switched the knobs. I thought it looked better with the black knobs versus the silver when I was done. But there it is, it works perfect and it sounds great. So enjoy your build and best of luck to you.